In particular, countries differ, and the relative importance of refurbishment versus new policies is also important. And most of the existing capital structure, which is growing more slowly, is in developed countries. Most of the building of new capital is going on in emerging economies. In 2006, 50% of all the cement built and used in the world was used in China, so clearly there's a lot of building going on. 100 gigawatts of new power, 90 of which was coal was built in China in 2006. How much is 100 gigawatts? That's Germany. That's the total installed capacity of Germany in 1 year. So the relative importance of policies, at least today, that we need to put in place today, is different between our sets of countries. We have modeled this. We have modeled the framework that people are talking about as a result of the COP that occurred in Bali. There are three fundamental categories that countries have looked at. Some countries are expected to take on a cap-and-trade regime, at least in power generation and parts of industry. That's expected, for example, in the OECD countries. We've modeled it that way. There's a new discussion about using sectoral approaches, that is, to having some kinds of policies that are cross international borders but in sectors. We expect some of that to occur in industry for competitiveness reasons, perhaps in aviation and bunker fuels. That's another place we would see it. And finally, there will be policies and measures. That is, countries will agree to the action. That is, they'll agree to implement a certain policy, but they won't agree to the outcome. Of course, that's the exact reverse of what occurs in a cap-and-trade system, where it's the outcome that you're agreeing to. In this case, you're agreeing to take the measure. And that might be at the very heart of the way in which the transition occurs to a broader participation in capped systems. Namely, for the time being, the emerging economies may agree to internationalize their national commitments for individual policies, but not agree to the outcomes. So we've modeled that, and what happens? Well, what happens, I would emphasize 2 points to get to 450. First of all, between now and 2030, the vast majority of the reductions occur as a result of energy efficiency. 57% of the reductions that occur to achieve 450 occur in energy efficiency. Why is that? Well, of course, because it takes a long time to build capital. It takes a long time to replace capital. It takes 15 years to build a coal-fired plant or a nuclear plant, to go through that entire process, maybe 5 years for natural gas. So it takes time to build this construction. Even 2020, from the point of view of the energy sector, is the day after tomorrow. Some decisions are being made today which will be not finished by 2020, in fact. So energy efficiency needs to fill the gap early on and provide us with an opportunity to develop new capital and to make reductions. Secondly, most of the reductions, 2/3 of the reductions, will occur outside the OECD region. And the largest chunk of that piece will occur in major economies. But talking about where the emission reductions occur is not the same thing as talking about who finances it, how it is financed. And that's at the crux of the discussion that's occurring in the Major Economies Forum and that's occurring in the COP. That is, what is going to be the relative contribution of carbon finance, that is the emissions trading and offset programs that will occur, and how much will be done by public financing. So it's a discussion both about the amount of public financing, but it's also what the public finance is used for. Of course, we'll need to change R&D. There'll need to be more R&D, and I think I would argue we need to have more cooperation. After the oil price shocks, there was a surge in public R&D in the largest IEA countries. In the countries that in 1970s were the countries that created the technologies in their laboratories. Of course, that's not so true today, because again, even in R&D, the emerging economies are now major players. And that may be at the crux of what we need to do. There hasn't been a surge in the amount in the IEA region in response to climate change. There's been a slight increase, but not a surge that you might have expected. By the same token, since the technologies have to move from R&D establishments, in some measure in developed countries and around the world, at rates that are unprecedented. I mean, if we think about how originally capital was moved, how we moved it from our own laboratories to our own economies, and then ultimately internationally, that's not a pattern that we can afford to do if we're going to reach 450. So we're going to need ways to cooperate. IPR protection is an integral part of that concern, and cooperating on the science, the development of technologies, leaving the ultimate commercialization to individual countries may be a way around that IPR problem. And then we're going to need enhanced policy coordination and cooperation, and it's going to take, I think, two different types. You can see this in the investment numbers that come out of this year's World Energy Outlook. Last year we said it was about $22 trillion in cumulative to the year 2030. We haven't announced what that number would be yet in the reference case, but we are saying that it will take $10 trillion more over that period in order to reach 450. And the largest sector is transport, which may surprise you. The reason that's the case is because by 2030, 60% of the vehicles sold in the world will be electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, or hybrids. It'll be the hybridization. That has to occur. And that will require a lot of investment, even as the automobile fleet greatly increases. In a globally traded commodity like automobiles, some kind of cooperation, perhaps even on standard setting, might be important in terms of accelerating the market transformation to more efficient vehicles. In areas of buildings and power plants, which are not so globally traded, we're perhaps looking at the exchange of views of best practice. Now, let me conclude by saying that, well, of course, Copenhagen needs to deliver a framework of action that establishes a price on carbon. It needs to establish other incentives to deal with the case where there are market failures. In particular, it needs to provide clarity about those incentives and where we're going so that investors know that. But what I would argue is that it also needs to empower other organizations. In energy efficiency, we've done a lot of work on market failures, and we've been able to demonstrate that they're quite significant, in particular what's called the principal agent problem, or sometimes referred to as the landlord-tenant problem, where the owner of the capital is disassociated to some degree from the user of the capital, the one who pays the operating expenses. It's good.
Mr. Bradley, excuse me.
Yep.
We agreed on speaking about 10, 12 minutes.
Okay.
So if you could
conclude right now.
Okay.
Only to say that we need various levels of governments, from national governments to cities, but we're also going to have to empower other organizations around the world, APEC, the IEA perhaps, and others, in order to engage in the capacity building and other support for this market change. Thank you very much.